The morning I tried to explain to my father why I couldn't get out of bed, he looked at me with disgust and said, "Stop being dramatic, Tiffany. Depression is just an excuse for lazy people." 3 months later, Dr. Martinez would tell him something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about mental health. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Tiffany Coleman, and for most of my 22 years, I lived in the shadow of what my family called the perfect American dream. We had the white picket fence house in Millbrook, Ohio, complete with a manicured lawn that my father, Robert Coleman, obsessed over every Saturday morning. My mother, Sandra, worked as a real estate agent and always made sure our family looked picture perfect to the outside world. Growing up, emotions weren't something we discussed in the Coleman household. When I was 8 and cried because kids at school were mean to me, my father's response was always the same. "Toughen up, Buttercup. The world doesn't care about your feelings." My mother would add her own version. "Smile more, honey. Nobody likes a sad face." The first time I remember feeling that heavy, suffocating darkness was during my sophomore year of high school. I'd wake up and feel like there was a cement blanket wrapped around my entire body. Getting dressed felt impossible. Brushing my teeth seemed like climbing Mount Everest. But when I tried to tell my parents I was struggling, they had their standard responses ready. "You're just being a teenager," my mother would say while applying her lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Everyone feels moody sometimes." My father was less diplomatic. "When I was your age, I worked 3 jobs and helped support my family. You have nothing to be sad about, Tiffany. Count your blessings." So I learned to hide it. I became an expert at plastering on fake smiles, forcing myself through school days that felt like walking through quicksand, and pretending everything was fine during family dinners. My younger brother Jake seemed to breeze through life effortlessly, getting good grades and making friends like it was the easiest thing in the world. He became the golden child, while I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. College was supposed to be my escape. I got into Ohio State University and moved 2 hours away from home, thinking distance would somehow magically cure whatever was wrong with me. For the first semester, the change of scenery actually helped. I made a few friends, joined the photography club, and even started dating someone, a guy named Marcus from my psychology class, who seemed to understand that sometimes I needed quiet days. But by spring semester of my junior year, the darkness came back with a vengeance. This time, it was worse than anything I'd experienced before. I started missing classes, not because I didn't care, but because the simple act of walking across campus felt like an impossible task. My grades began slipping. I stopped returning calls from friends. Even Marcus, who had been patient and supportive, eventually started expressing frustration. "I don't understand what's wrong with you lately," he said one evening when I canceled our dinner plans for the 3rd time that week. "It's like you're not even trying anymore." The breaking point came during finals week. I had 3 major exams and a research paper due, but instead of studying, I spent 4 days lying in my dorm bed, staring at the ceiling. My roommate Ashley had gone home for the week, so nobody was around to witness my complete breakdown. I hadn't showered in days. I was living off crackers and whatever drinks were left in our mini fridge. The thought of facing those exams filled me with such overwhelming panic that my chest would tighten and I'd struggle to breathe. When I inevitably failed 2 of my finals and submitted a half-finished paper for my American literature class, the academic probation letter arrived at my parents' house the same day I did for summer break. My father was waiting for me in the driveway, holding the letter like it was evidence of a crime. "What the hell is this, Tiffany?" he demanded before I'd even gotten my suitcase out of the car. "Academic probation? Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on your education?" My mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment. "The neighbors are going to see," she whispered urgently. "Get inside." The next 2 hours were brutal. My parents sat me down at our kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten countless silent dinners as a child, and proceeded to tear apart everything about my life. My father paced back and forth like a lawyer giving a closing argument. "You had everything handed to you," he said, his voice rising with each word. A good home, loving parents, opportunities I never had. And this is how you repay us? By failing school and wasting our money? I've been struggling, I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I might need help, professional help. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother let out a laugh, not a happy laugh, but the kind that cuts through you like glass. Professional help? She repeated. Tiffany, honey, you don't need a therapist. You need to grow up. You need to stop making excuses and take responsibility for your choices. I'm not making excuses, I said, feeling tears start to burn behind my eyes. Something is really wrong. I can't sleep, I can't concentrate, I barely get out of bed most days. I think I might be depressed. That's when my father exploded. His face turned red, and he slammed his hand down on the table so hard that the salt and pepper shakers jumped. Depressed? He shouted. You want to know what depression is? Depression is watching your father work himself to death trying to provide for his family. Depression is losing your job and not knowing how you're going to pay the mortgage. You don't have depression, Tiffany. You have a case of spoiled brat syndrome. Robert, my mother said softly, but he wasn't finished. No, Sandra, she needs to hear this. This whole depression thing is just the latest trend for kids who don't want to work hard. In my day, we didn't have anxiety disorders and depression diagnoses. We had discipline and character. We didn't run to doctors every time life got difficult. I tried to explain how I felt, the constant exhaustion, the hopelessness, the way simple tasks felt impossible. But every word I spoke seemed to make him angrier. Snap out of it, he yelled, his voice echoing through the house. Just snap out of it, Tiffany. Stop wallowing in self-pity and fix your life. You think the world is going to feel sorry for you? You think employers are going to hire someone who can't handle a little stress? My mother nodded along, adding her own commentary. Your father is right, sweetie. Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time being grateful for what you have, you'd feel better. Have you tried just choosing to be happy? That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and honor roll certificates, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally had just told me that my pain wasn't real, that my struggles were character flaws, and that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But something inside me refused to accept their version of reality. Maybe I was broken, maybe I was weak, but I knew what I was experiencing was real. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While my parents were at their respective jobs, my father at the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 23 years, and my mother showing houses to potential buyers, I sat at our desktop computer in the family room and began researching. I'd never really looked into mental health services before. The internet was full of information about depression, anxiety, and treatment options that I'd never known existed. For the first time, I read descriptions of symptoms that matched exactly what I'd been experiencing. The persistent fatigue, the inability to feel joy in things I used to love, the overwhelming sense of hopelessness. It all had a name. The closest mental health clinic was in downtown Columbus, about 45 minutes from our house. The website showed a clean, professional building with smiling therapists and psychiatrists. I spent an hour reading through their staff profiles before settling on Dr. Elena Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in young adult depression and anxiety disorders. Her photo showed a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. More importantly, she had availability for new patients. Making that first phone call was terrifying. My hands shook as I dialed the number, and when the receptionist answered, I almost hung up. But something about her warm, professional voice gave me courage. Millbrook Mental Health Services, this is Jenny speaking. How can I help you today? Hi, I managed to say. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Dr. Martinez. Of course. Is this for yourself or a family member? For myself. I think I might have depression. Jenny's voice remained warm and non-judgmental as she walked me through the intake process. She explained that the first appointment would be a comprehensive evaluation, lasting about 90 minutes. She also mentioned that while they accepted my insurance, there would be a copay involved. That's when reality hit me. I didn't have the money for ongoing therapy sessions, and I certainly couldn't ask my parents to pay for something they considered fake. I'd been working part-time at a campus coffee shop during school, but my summer job at the local grocery store barely paid enough to cover my car insurance and gas money. "Is there a payment plan option?" I asked, feeling embarrassed. "Absolutely," Jenny assured me. "Dr. Martinez works with patients to make treatment affordable. Don't let financial concerns stop you from getting help. We can discuss options during your first visit." My appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. That gave me 5 days to figure out how to get to Columbus without my parents knowing. I told them I was meeting my college friend Rachel for lunch and shopping. A believable lie, since Rachel lived in a Columbus suburb and we'd hung out before. The night before my appointment, I barely slept. Part of me was terrified that Dr. Martinez would confirm what my parents believed, that I was just being dramatic and needed to toughen up. But another part of me desperately hoped for validation, for someone to acknowledge that what I was experiencing was real and treatable. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I left the house wearing a sundress and sandals, trying to look like someone going shopping with a friend rather than someone seeking psychiatric help. The drive to Columbus felt endless, and I got lost twice trying to find the clinic's parking garage. The Millbrook Mental Health Building was exactly as advertised, clean, modern, and welcoming. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and classical music playing quietly in the background. I filled out what felt like dozens of forms, answering questions about my medical history, family history, current symptoms, and life circumstances. When Dr. Martinez finally called my name, I was struck by how different she was from what I'd expected. She was shorter than her photo suggested, with graying hair pulled back in a professional bun, but her smile was exactly as warm as it had appeared online. She wore a simple blue blouse and dark slacks, and she moved with the confident, calm demeanor of someone who'd spent years helping people through difficult times. Her office was cozy rather than clinical. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with psychology textbooks and self-help books. A small couch faced 2 comfortable chairs, with a coffee table between them holding a box of tissues and a small plant. Diplomas and certifications covered another wall, but they felt reassuring rather than intimidating. "Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Dr. Martinez said, gesturing to the seating area. "Can I get you some water or tea?" I chose one of the chairs and accepted a bottle of water, grateful to have something to do with my hands. Dr. Martinez settled into the chair across from me with a legal pad and pen. "So, Tiffany," she began, her voice gentle but professional, "tell me what brought you here today." For the first time in my life, I told my story to someone who listened without judgment. I described the heavy feeling that had plagued me since high school, the way simple tasks felt impossible during my worst days, and how my academic performance had suffered. I explained my parents' reactions and their belief that depression was just an excuse for laziness. Dr. Martinez took notes as I spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She never interrupted or dismissed anything I said. When I described my father's angry outburst, she simply nodded and said, "That must have felt very isolating." It did, I admitted, surprised by how good it felt to have my feelings acknowledged. Sometimes I wonder if they're right, though. Maybe I am just weak. "Tell me more about that," Dr. Martinez said. "What does weak mean to you?" We spent the next hour diving deep into my symptoms, my family dynamics, and my personal history. She asked about my sleep patterns, my appetite, my energy levels, and my ability to concentrate. She inquired about any thoughts of self-harm or suicide, a question that made me pause because I had experienced those thoughts, though I'd never told anyone before. "I've thought about it," I admitted quietly, not seriously making plans or anything, but sometimes I wonder if everyone would be better off without me, if I didn't have to feel this way anymore. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but not alarmed. "Thank you for being honest with me about that. Those thoughts are actually a common symptom of depression, and it's important that we address them as part of your treatment. Treatment. The word hung in the air like a promise. "So, you think I do have depression?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Based on everything you've told me today, yes, I believe you meet the criteria for major depressive disorder," Dr. Martinez said, matter-of-factly. "Your symptoms have been persistent for more than 2 weeks, they're interfering with your daily functioning, and they're causing you significant distress. This is a real medical condition, Tiffany, not a character flaw or a sign of weakness." I felt tears spring to my eyes, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Someone believed me. Someone with medical training and years of experience was validating everything I'd been feeling. "What happens now?" I asked. Dr. Martinez explained that there were several treatment options available. We could try therapy alone, medication alone, or a combination of both. She recommended starting with therapy sessions once a week while we evaluated whether medication might be helpful. "I also think it might be beneficial to involve your family in this process at some point," she said carefully. "Many people, especially older generations, have misconceptions about mental health. Sometimes education can help bridge that gap." The thought of my parents sitting in this office, being told by a psychiatrist that their daughter's depression was real, was both thrilling and terrifying. Would they accept Dr. Martinez's professional opinion, or would they find new ways to dismiss and minimize my experience? As I scheduled my next appointment and walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. For the first time, I had a plan, a professional ally, and the knowledge that what I was going through had a name, and more importantly, treatment options. The drive home felt different than the drive there. I wasn't cured. I understood that recovery would take time and work, but I was no longer alone in my struggle. The question now was whether I could continue this journey in secret, or if the time had come to confront my family with the truth about my diagnosis. Either way, I was finally on a path forward, and that made all the difference. For the next 6 weeks, I became a master of deception. Every Tuesday afternoon, I told my parents I was meeting Rachel, going to the library, or running errands. In reality, I was driving to Columbus for my therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez. The 45-minute drive each way became my transition time, leaving behind the Coleman family dynamics and entering a space where my feelings were valid and my struggles were real. The therapy sessions were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Dr. Martinez introduced me to concepts I'd never heard of: cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness techniques, and something called thought challenging. She helped me recognize the difference between facts and the harsh inner critic that had been running commentary in my head for years. "Depression often acts like a cruel roommate in your mind," she explained during our third session. "It tells you lies about yourself, your worth, and your future. Part of recovery is learning to evict that roommate and replace those thoughts with more balanced, realistic ones." She gave me homework assignments that felt strange but surprisingly helpful. I started keeping a mood journal, rating my energy and emotional state each day on a scale of 1 to 10. I practiced breathing exercises when the familiar weight of anxiety settled on my chest. Most importantly, I began to challenge the automatic negative thoughts that had become my default setting. When my brain told me, "You're worthless," I learned to ask, "Where's the evidence for that?" When it whispered, "You'll never get better," I practiced responding with, "Recovery takes time, and I'm making progress." The most difficult part wasn't the therapy itself, it was maintaining my facade at home. My parents had settled into a routine of polite disappointment with me. My father would make comments about young people today whenever news stories mentioned mental health. My mother started leaving self-help articles from magazines on my bed, pieces with titles like 10 Ways to Think Positively and The Power of Gratitude. My brother Jake, now a senior in high school, seemed oblivious to the tension. He was busy with football practice, college applications, and a girlfriend named Madison who giggled at everything he said. During family dinners, he'd chatter about his day while I pushed food around my plate, grateful that his enthusiasm filled the silence. "Tiffany's been quiet lately," my mother observed one evening, as if I weren't sitting right there. "Maybe she's finally growing up."
"About time," my father replied, cutting into his pork chop with unnecessary force. All that drama was exhausting. If only they knew that their dramatic daughter was actually working harder than she'd ever worked in her life. The mental effort required to challenge years of negative thought patterns was exhausting. Some days, I'd come home from therapy feeling emotionally drained, only to have to pretend everything was fine during dinner. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The good days started outnumbering the bad ones. I found myself actually enjoying small pleasures again. The taste of coffee in the morning, the way sunlight looked filtering through my bedroom curtains, the satisfaction of completing simple tasks. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather like slowly turning up the volume on life after months of everything being muted. During my 7th session, Dr. Martinez brought up a topic we'd been dancing around for weeks. "Tiffany, you've been making excellent progress," she said, reviewing her notes. "Your mood scores have improved consistently. You're implementing the coping strategies we've discussed, and you're starting to challenge those automatic negative thought patterns. I'm wondering if it's time to consider involving your family in this process." My stomach immediately tightened. I don't think they're ready for that. What makes you say that? I described the articles my mother left on my bed, my father's ongoing commentary about mental health being a trend, and the general atmosphere of judgment that surrounded any discussion of emotions in our house. "Those behaviors suggest they care about you but don't understand what you're going through," Dr. Martinez said thoughtfully. "Sometimes families need education and guidance to become supportive. Would you be open to inviting them to a session where I could explain your diagnosis and treatment?" The idea terrified me. My parents in Dr. Martinez's office, hearing professional confirmation that their daughter really did have a mental health condition, it could go one of two ways. Either they'd finally understand and become supportive, or they'd find new ways to minimize and dismiss everything. "What if they refuse to come?" I asked. "Then that tells us something important about their willingness to be part of your healing process," Dr. Martinez replied. "But you might be surprised. Many parents, once they understand that mental health conditions are medical issues rather than character flaws, become powerful advocates for their children." That night, I lay awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to my ceiling in middle school, trying to imagine how such a conversation might go. My father's face when Dr. Martinez explained that depression was a chemical imbalance in the brain, not a lack of willpower. My mother's reaction when she learned that positive thinking alone couldn't cure a medical condition. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following Saturday morning, my mother was sorting through mail at the kitchen counter when she held up an envelope from my insurance company. "Tiffany, what's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Why are you getting medical bills?" My heart started racing. I'd been so careful to intercept any insurance correspondence, but this one had slipped through. I walked over and saw it was an explanation of benefits form detailing my therapy sessions. "Millbrook Mental Health Services," my mother read aloud. "You've been seeing a psychiatrist? Behind our backs?" My father looked up from his newspaper, his expression darkening. "What's this about, Tiffany?" This wasn't how I'd planned to tell them. I'd imagined a careful conversation, maybe starting with some of the educational materials Dr. Martinez had given me. Instead, I was being confronted with evidence of what they clearly viewed as deception. "I've been getting help," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Professional help for my depression." Depression. My father said the word like it tasted bitter. "So you went behind our backs to some quack doctor who's filling your head with nonsense?" "She's not a quack," I said. "Dr. Martinez is a licensed psychiatrist. She has years of experience treating people with depression and anxiety." My mother was scanning the insurance form, her face growing paler. "Do you have any idea how much these sessions cost? And you've been going for weeks without telling us?" "I've been paying for it myself," I said, which wasn't entirely true. The insurance had covered most of it, but I needed them to understand this wasn't about money. "That's not the point," my father snapped. "The point is you went behind our backs to some stranger instead of talking to your family. We could have helped you work through whatever problems you think you have." "You did help," I said, anger starting to bubble up. "You helped me realize that I couldn't count on you to take my mental health seriously. You helped me understand that I had to advocate for myself because you weren't going to do it." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set the insurance form down on the counter like it was contaminated, and my father folded his newspaper with sharp, angry creases. "So, what did this doctor tell you?" my mother asked finally. "What's her professional opinion about our problematic daughter?" This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for without knowing it. I took a deep breath and looked at both of my parents. Really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years. "She diagnosed me with major depressive disorder," I said, clearly. "It's a real medical condition caused by chemical imbalances in the brain. It's not laziness, it's not weakness, and it's not something I can just snap out of. It requires treatment, just like diabetes or high blood pressure." My father's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Chemical imbalances, right. And I suppose she wants to put you on medication, too? Get you hooked on antidepressants?" "We're exploring all treatment options," I said, standing straighter. "But the important thing is that I'm getting better. The therapy is working. I'm learning coping strategies and challenging negative thought patterns. I'm actually starting to feel hopeful about my future." "Hopeful about bankrupting your parents with medical bills for imaginary problems," my father muttered. That's when something inside me shifted. For weeks, I'd been learning to challenge the cruel voice in my head. Now I realized that voice hadn't originated in my mind. It had learned to speak in my father's tone. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady and strong. "Dr. Martinez suggested that we have a family session. She wants to meet with all of us to explain my diagnosis and discuss how you can support my recovery. She said that family education and involvement often makes a huge difference in treatment outcomes." My parents exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. "Are you willing to come to an appointment with me?" I asked. "Are you willing to listen to a medical professional explain what I've been going through?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Everything that happened next would determine not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire future.
The week that followed was the longest of my life. My parents didn't give me an answer immediately. Instead, they retreated into hushed conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. My father spent extra hours in the garage, tinkering with his old Mustang, while my mother threw herself into deep cleaning projects that made the house smell like bleach and lemon polish. Jake, bless his 17-year-old obliviousness, finally noticed the tension during dinner on Wednesday night. "Why is everyone acting so weird lately?" he asked, pausing for a mid-bite of spaghetti. "Did somebody die or something?" "Your sister has been seeing a psychiatrist without telling us," my father said bluntly, causing Jake to nearly choke on his food. "Wait, what?" Jake looked at me with genuine concern. "Are you okay? Like, seriously okay?" It was the first time anyone in my family had asked me that question without skepticism or judgment. "I'm getting better," I told him honestly. "The therapy is helping." "Therapy's cool," Jake said with a shrug that made my father's jaw clench. "Half my friends see counselors. Madison's been going since her parents' divorce. She says it really helped her deal with everything." My mother set down her fork with a sharp clink. "That's completely different, Jake. Madison was dealing with a traumatic family situation. That's not the same as this." "What's this, exactly?" Jake asked, looking genuinely confused. "Tiffany wanting to feel better?" Before anyone could answer, my father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," he muttered, heading for the back door. That night, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. She entered without waiting for permission, something she hadn't done since I was in elementary school, and sat on the edge of my bed. "Your father and I have been talking," she said quietly, "about this situation." I closed my laptop and turned to face her. "And? We're concerned that you're being taken advantage of," she continued. "These doctors, they have a financial incentive to keep you coming back. They'll tell you whatever you want to hear as long as you keep paying them." I felt my progress from weeks of therapy kick in. Instead of getting defensive or angry, I took a deep breath and tried to respond from a place of facts rather than emotion.
Mom, did you know that depression affects over 21 million adults in the United States every year? That's according to the National Institute of Mental Health. It's one of the most common and treatable mental health conditions. She blanked, clearly not expecting statistics. Where did you learn that? From Dr. Martinez. She's been educating me about my condition. Did you also know that depression has nothing to do with personal weakness or character flaws? It's caused by a combination of genetic, biological, environmental, and psychological factors. My mother was quiet for a long moment. "You sound different when you talk about this," she said finally. "More confident." "That's what happens when someone validates your experience instead of dismissing it," I said gently. "That's what therapy does. It gives you tools to understand yourself and cope with difficult emotions." She fidgeted with the edge of my comforter. "Your father thinks this doctor is going to try to convince us that we're bad parents, that we somehow caused your condition. Is that what you're worried about?" I asked. "Is Dr. Martinez going to blame you?" My mother's eyes filled with tears, something I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral 5 years earlier. "I just want to understand, Tiffany. I don't know how to help you, and that scares me. When you were little and you got sick, I knew exactly what to do. Chicken soup, children's Tylenol, extra blankets. But this, I don't know how to fix this." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as the woman who dismissed my emotions, but as someone who was genuinely afraid and out of her depth. "You don't have to fix me, Mom," I said softly. "I'm not broken. I have a medical condition that requires treatment, just like if I had asthma or diabetes. The best way you can help is by learning about depression and supporting my treatment." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Will you ask your doctor if we can meet with her? Your father, too?" The relief I felt was overwhelming. "Really? I can't promise your father will be receptive," she warned, "but I think we owe it to you to try, and maybe we owe it to ourselves to understand what we've been dealing with." I called Dr. Martinez the next morning and explained the situation. She was able to schedule a family session for the following Tuesday, my regular appointment time, but extended to 90 minutes to accommodate everyone. "How are you feeling about this?" Dr. Martinez asked during our brief phone conversation. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also hopeful. I think my mom is starting to understand, but my dad?" I trailed off. "Remember, Tiffany, you can't control how your parents respond to information. You can only control how you present yourself and advocate for your needs. You've already shown incredible courage by seeking treatment and standing up for yourself." The days leading up to the appointment crawled by. My father remained mostly silent on the subject, though I caught him reading articles on his phone when he thought no one was looking. My mother started asking me small questions: how long I'd been feeling this way, whether certain things triggered my symptoms, if I'd ever felt this way before college. Tuesday morning arrived gray and humid, with the kind of sticky heat that made everything feel harder. We drove to Columbus in my father's truck, with me navigating from the passenger seat and my mother in the back. The silence was thick, but not entirely hostile, more like the nervous quiet before a major exam. The waiting room felt different with my parents there. My father sat rigidly in his chair, wearing the same dress shirt and slacks he wore to church, his hands folded tightly in his lap. My mother kept smoothing her hair and checking her purse, clearly anxious about making a good impression. When Dr. Martinez called us back, she greeted my parents with the same warm professionalism she'd always shown me. She shook their hands, offered them beverages, and guided us all to her office, where she'd arranged chairs in a small circle. "Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, thank you so much for coming today. I know this can feel uncomfortable, but I want you to know that Tiffany has been making excellent progress in her treatment. She's shown remarkable courage and commitment to her recovery." My father's expression remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in his eyes at the word recovery. "Doctor," he said carefully, "I want to be direct with you. My wife and I are concerned that our daughter is being convinced she has problems that don't really exist. In our day, people dealt with life's challenges without needing professional intervention." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern, Mr. Coleman. It's actually quite common for family members to have questions about mental health diagnoses. Can you tell me what you know about depression as a medical condition?" "I know it's become very popular to diagnose lately," my father replied. "It seems like every young person claims to have anxiety or depression these days." "You're right that we're talking about mental health more openly now than in previous generations, but that's largely because we understand so much more about how the brain works. Depression isn't a new condition, we just have better tools to identify and treat it now." She pulled out a folder and opened it on the coffee table. Let me show you something. These are brain scans of patients with depression compared to patients without depression. You can actually see the differences in brain activity, particularly in areas that regulate mood, sleep, appetite, and concentration. My parents leaned forward to look at the images, and I watched my father's skeptical expression begin to shift slightly. Depression causes measurable changes in brain chemistry, Dr. Martinez continued. Specifically, it affects neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, the chemicals that help brain cells communicate with each other. This isn't a matter of willpower or character, it's biology. My mother spoke up quietly. So this isn't something Tiffany could have just gotten over? No more than she could get over diabetes or a broken leg, Dr. Martinez said gently. And just like those conditions, depression responds well to appropriate treatment. The combination of therapy and, when necessary, medication can be incredibly effective. She turned to address my father directly. Mr. Coleman, I want you to know that having a child with depression doesn't reflect poorly on your parenting. Mental health conditions can affect anyone, regardless of how loving or supportive their family is. What matters now is how we move forward together to support Tiffany's continued recovery. The session continued for another hour, with Dr. Martinez patiently answering every question my parents asked. She explained the difference between normal sadness and clinical depression, described the various treatment options available, and outlined what recovery typically looked like. But the most powerful moment came when she asked my parents to describe what they'd observed about my behavior over the past few months. She's been different, my mother admitted, more engaged, more like herself. She's been helping with dinner again, and she actually laughed at Jake's jokes last weekend. Her grades improved too, my father added reluctantly. She retook those summer classes and got B's in both of them. Those improvements coincide directly with the start of Tiffany's treatment, Dr. Martinez pointed out. What you're seeing is the result of her hard work in therapy and her commitment to recovery. As the session wound down, Dr. Martinez gave my parents several brochures about depression and family support resources. She also scheduled a follow-up family session for 3 weeks later. Walking back to the truck, nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, my father broke the silence. "She wasn't what I expected," he said gruffly. "What did you expect?" I asked. "I don't know. Someone is trying to blame us, I guess. Or someone trying to convince you that you're sicker than you really are." He paused, fumbling with his keys. "But she made it sound like you actually do have something wrong, medically wrong." "I do, Dad," I said quietly. "I have been sick, but I'm getting better." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in months, I felt like we might actually be okay. The change in my household wasn't immediate or dramatic. It was more like watching ice slowly melt in spring sunshine. My father didn't suddenly become emotionally expressive, and my mother didn't transform into a mental health advocate overnight. But small shifts began happening that felt monumental after years of dismissal and misunderstanding. The first sign came 3 days after our family session. I was sitting at the kitchen table working on my laptop when my father walked in from the garage wiping his hands on an old rag. Instead of his usual grunt of acknowledgement, he actually stopped and looked at what I was doing. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward my screen. I glanced up, surprised by the question. "Just some research for my photography portfolio. I'm putting together a series about abandoned buildings in Ohio." He moved closer, peering over my shoulder at the images I'd been editing. "These are pretty good," he said quietly. "You've got a good eye for composition." It was such a simple comment, but it was the first time in months that my father had expressed genuine interest in something I was doing. More importantly, it was the first time he'd offered praise without any accompanying criticism or lecture. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice casual despite the warmth spreading through my chest. "I'm hoping to submit some of these to a local gallery." Instead of dismissing the idea as impractical, which would have been his old response, he nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like a good goal." My mother's evolution was more obvious but equally meaningful. She started leaving different kinds of articles on my bed, not the dismissive, think positive pieces from before, but actual information about depression, anxiety, and mental health treatment. One morning, I found a printout of an article titled, "Supporting a Family Member with Depression, a Guide for Parents." When I found her in the laundry room later that day, folding towels with unusual intensity, I decided to address it. "Thanks for the article, Mom," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I've been doing some reading, trying to educate myself, like Dr. Martinez suggested." She paused, smoothing a towel that was already perfectly flat. "I realize I haven't been very helpful. I thought I was being supportive by encouraging you to be positive, but I can see now that I was minimizing what you were going through." "You were trying to help in the only way you knew how," I said gently. "You couldn't support something you didn't understand." "But I should have tried to understand instead of just dismissing it," she replied. "That's what good mothers do. They listen to their children and take their concerns seriously." The conversation might have ended there, but my mother surprised me by continuing. "I've been thinking about your grandmother," she said unexpectedly. "My mother. She went through periods where she'd barely leave her room for weeks at a time. We always called her spells, but looking back with what I know now," she trailed off, shaking her head, "I think she might have had depression too. But back then, there was such shame around mental health issues. People just suffered in silence." This revelation reframed so much of my family history. My grandmother, who I'd always thought of as a quiet, melancholy woman, might have been struggling with the same condition I was facing. The thought was both heartbreaking and oddly comforting, like discovering I wasn't alone in a way I'd never imagined. Jake, meanwhile, became my unexpected ally. He started checking in on me regularly, asking how therapy was going and whether I needed anything. One evening, he knocked on my bedroom door and entered carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Madison's mom wanted me to give you this," he said, handing me a business card. "She's a social worker who specializes in family therapy. She said if our parents ever want to talk to someone about how to support you better, she'd be happy to help." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, Madison's family recognizing our situation and offering resources, made me realize how differently mental health was viewed by my generation compared to my parents. "Jake," I said as he settled into my desk chair, "can I ask you something? Were you worried about me before I started getting help?" He was quiet for a moment, swirling his hot chocolate thoughtfully. "Yeah, actually. You seemed really sad all the time, and nothing I did could make you laugh anymore. I didn't know what depression was back then, but I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how to help." "You helped more than you realize," I told him, "just by being normal and treating me like I wasn't broken." "You're not broken," he said simply. "You just needed the right tools to feel better." My therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez continued to be transformative, but now they included processing my family's changing dynamics. She helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with finally receiving support after so long without it. "It's common to feel angry about the time you lost to unsupportive responses," she explained during one session. "It's also normal to feel guilty about that anger, especially when family members are making genuine efforts to change." She was right. I did feel angry sometimes. Angry about all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep thinking I was weak or defective. Angry about the academic struggles that could have been avoided with proper support. Angry about the months of carrying this burden alone. But I also felt profound relief and hope. For the first time in my life, I had a family that was trying to understand me. My parents started asking about my therapy appointments, not to judge or interfere, but to show genuine interest in my progress. My father even offered to drive me to Columbus when my car was in the shop, sitting in the waiting room without complaint while I had my session. The biggest test came 6 weeks after our family meeting with Dr. Martinez. I'd been having a particularly difficult week. Not a full relapse, but a series of challenging days that reminded me recovery wasn't linear. My sleep had been disrupted, my anxiety was higher than usual, and I was struggling to maintain the positive momentum I'd built. In the past, I would have hidden these struggles from my family, afraid of confirming their beliefs that I was weak or attention-seeking. But Dr. Martinez had been working with me on communication skills and self-advocacy. During dinner on Thursday night, I took a deep breath and decided to be honest.
I wanted to let you all know that I've been having a tough week, I said, setting down my fork. My depression symptoms have been a bit stronger lately, and I'm working with Dr. Martinez on some adjustments to my coping strategies. The silence that followed felt different from the hostile silences of the past. This felt like my family processing information and figuring out how to respond supportively. My father spoke first. Is there anything we can do to help? The question nearly brought tears to my eyes. 6 months earlier, he'd been telling me to snap out of it. Now he was asking how he could support my mental health. Actually, yes, I said. It would help if you could be patient with me this week if I seem quieter or less energetic than usual. And maybe we could keep dinner conversations light, nothing too stressful or emotionally heavy. Of course, my mother said immediately. What else? That's really it, I said, feeling a wave of gratitude. Just knowing that you understand this as part of my recovery process means everything. Jake reached over and squeezed my shoulder. We've got your back, sis. That weekend, something unprecedented happened. My father knocked on my bedroom door Saturday morning and asked if I wanted to go for a drive. Not to run errands or accomplish anything specific, just to get out of the house for a while. We drove through the Ohio countryside, past cornfields and red barns, listening to classic rock on the radio. After about 20 minutes, he turned the music down and spoke. I owe you an apology, Tiffany, he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I was wrong about your depression. I was wrong to tell you to just get over it. I was wrong to dismiss something that was causing you real pain. I felt tears building, but didn't try to stop them. Dad, you... Let me finish, he said gently. I grew up believing that emotions were weaknesses, that asking for help was giving up. My father never talked about feelings, and his father probably didn't either. But that doesn't make it right. You were brave to get help, and I should have supported you from the beginning. We pulled over at a small park and sat on a picnic table, watching a family of ducks swim across a pond. My father wasn't finished. Dr. Martinez gave me some books to read, he continued, about depression, about how to be supportive. I'm learning that mental health is just as important as physical health. I'm learning that strength sometimes means admitting you need help. I'm proud of you for being willing to learn, I said, wiping my eyes. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, he admitted. But you're my daughter, and I love you. If understanding depression is what it takes to be a better father, then that's what I'm going to do. As we drove home, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. 9 months earlier, I'd been failing college classes and contemplating whether life was worth living. Now, I was surrounded by a family that was actively working to understand and support my mental health journey. The transformation wasn't complete. Recovery never really is. But for the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about my future. I had professional support, family understanding, and most importantly, I had learned to advocate for myself and my needs. Dr. Martinez had been right about something she'd told me in our very first session. You are not your depression, Tiffany. You are a person who happens to have depression, and with proper treatment and support, you can live a full, meaningful life. Looking back, I realized that journey had started the moment I decided to seek help, despite my family's initial resistance. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is save yourself, even when no one else believes you need saving. Returning to Ohio State for the fall semester felt like stepping into a completely different life. I walked across the same campus where I'd once struggled to attend classes, but everything looked brighter somehow. The autumn leaves were more vibrant, the Gothic architecture more inspiring rather than intimidating. I wasn't the same person who had failed those finals 8 months earlier. My new dorm room was in a different building, and my roommate was a transfer student named Claire who was studying art therapy. When I mentioned that I'd been seeing a therapist for depression, she didn't flinch or change the subject. Instead, she shared that she'd struggled with anxiety after her parents' messy divorce and had found therapy life-changing. It's so refreshing to meet someone who gets it, she said as we arranged our shared living space. My last roommate acted like mental health treatment was contagious or something. Having a supportive living environment made an enormous difference. Claire and I developed routines that supported both of our mental health.
morning walks around campus, study sessions that included breaks for breathing exercises, and honest conversations about how we were feeling without judgment or attempts to fix each other. My academic performance reflected my improved mental state immediately. In my photography class, I threw myself into projects with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. My depression series, black and white images exploring themes of isolation and recovery, caught the attention of Professor Williams, who encouraged me to submit them to the university's annual student art exhibition.
These images tell a powerful story, she said during our one-on-one critique session. They're technically excellent, but more importantly, they have emotional depth. You're not just documenting subjects, you're revealing something meaningful about the human experience. The validation felt incredible, but what mattered more was that I was creating again. The passion for photography that depression had stolen from me was flooding back, stronger than before. I found myself staying after class to experiment with lighting techniques, volunteering to photograph campus events, and planning weekend trips to explore new locations. My relationship with Marcus had ended permanently. We'd had an honest conversation over coffee where we both acknowledged that we'd grown in different directions. There was no animosity, just the recognition that the person who had dated someone struggling with untreated depression wasn't compatible with the person I was becoming in recovery. "I'm proud of you for getting help," he told me as we parted ways. "You seem like yourself again. Actually, you seem like a version of yourself I never got to meet before." His words stuck with me because they were true. Depression had been so much a part of my identity for so long that I was still discovering who I was without it defining my everyday. I was more outgoing than I'd realized, more creative, more willing to take risks and try new things. One of those new things was joining the campus mental health advocacy group. Dr. Martinez had mentioned it during one of our sessions, suggesting that peer support could be beneficial for my continued recovery. The first meeting I attended was in the basement of the Student Union, a circle of about 15 students sharing their experiences with various mental health challenges. There was David, a senior with bipolar disorder who spoke eloquently about the importance of medication compliance, Sarah, a sophomore dealing with panic attacks who had developed an impressive toolkit of grounding techniques, Miguel, a graduate student whose PTSD from military service had nearly derailed his academic career until he found the right therapist. What struck me most was how normal everyone seemed. These weren't the broken or weak people my father had once imagined mental health patients to be. They were students like me, pursuing degrees and dreams while managing medical conditions that happened to affect their brains rather than their kidneys or hearts. I started sharing my own story at meetings, describing my family's initial resistance and eventual transformation. Other students with unsupportive families found hope in my experience, while those with supportive families gained perspective on how fortunate they were. "Your parents really came around?" asked a freshman named Tyler, whose father had threatened to stop paying for college if he continued therapy. "How did you get them to change their minds?" "Professional intervention made all the difference," I explained. "Sometimes families need education from an authority figure they respect. My parents couldn't dismiss a psychiatrist with medical credentials the way they'd dismissed me." The advocacy group became more than just peer support. It became a platform for broader change. We organized mental health awareness events, brought speakers to campus, and worked with the counseling center to improve accessibility of services. I found myself becoming a leader in ways I'd never imagined possible during my darkest days. My family's evolution continued throughout the semester. My father started texting me occasionally, not his usual practical messages about car maintenance or grades, but genuine check-ins about how I was feeling. My mother sent care packages that included stress relief tea and mindfulness coloring books alongside usual cookies and snacks. The most surprising development came from Jake. During his college application process, he wrote his personal essay about watching his sister's mental health journey and how it had shaped his understanding of resilience and courage. He got into his first choice school and decided to major in psychology with the goal of becoming a counselor. "You inspired me," he told me during Thanksgiving break. "I want to help people the way Dr. Martinez helped you. I want to be the kind of person who listens and believes people when they say they're struggling." Our Thanksgiving dinner that year was markedly different from the tense, silent meals of the past.
My parents asked thoughtful questions about my advocacy work, my photography projects, and my therapy progress. When I mentioned feeling stressed about finals, instead of telling me to just study harder, my mother asked what coping strategies I planned to use. Dr. Martinez taught me about breaking large tasks into smaller, manageable steps, I explained, and I've been practicing mindfulness meditation when I feel overwhelmed. That sounds very practical, my father said, nodding approvingly. Much better than just panicking and hoping for the best. The comment made me laugh because it was so quintessentially him, finding a way to appreciate mental health tools by framing them as practical strategies rather than emotional support. But the important thing was that he was trying to understand and validate my methods. Christmas brought an unexpected gift. My parents had enrolled in a support group for families of people with mental health conditions. My mother mentioned it casually while we were decorating the tree, but I could tell it had been a significant decision for them. We meet every other Tuesday at the community center, she explained. There are about 12 families dealing with various situations: depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, ADHD. It's helpful to talk to other parents who understand what we've been learning. What's the most surprising thing you've discovered? I asked. My parents exchanged a look before my father answered. How common it is, I guess, and how many successful, accomplished people manage mental health conditions. The group facilitator is a retired teacher whose son has schizophrenia and just finished law school. There's a couple whose daughter has severe anxiety and graduated valedictorian. It's changed our whole perspective, my mother added. We used to think mental health problems were rare and shameful. Now we realize they're just another part of the human experience that some people have to navigate. As winter break progressed, I noticed my parents sharing articles about mental health on social media, a far cry from my father's previous dismissive comments. They'd become advocates themselves, gently correcting misconceptions when friends or relatives made ignorant comments about depression or therapy. One evening, my mother showed me a comment thread on Facebook where a family friend had posted something about kids these days being too sensitive. My mother had responded with a thoughtful explanation about the difference between normal emotional reactions and clinical depression, including links to educational resources. I couldn't have written that a year ago, she admitted. I would have agreed with Carol's post, but now I know better, and I feel like I have a responsibility to speak up when I see misinformation. Back at school for spring semester, I reflected on the incredible transformation that had occurred over the past year. I'd gone from a struggling student whose family dismissed her mental health concerns to a thriving young adult with strong family support and clear academic and personal goals. My relationship with Dr. Martinez had evolved too. Our sessions had moved from crisis intervention to maintenance and growth. We met every other week now, instead of weekly, focusing on continued skill development and processing new life challenges as they arose. You've exceeded every goal we set when you first started treatment, she told me during one session. Your mood has stabilized, your coping skills are strong, your family relationships have improved dramatically, and you're thriving academically and socially. Sometimes I can't believe how different everything is, I said. A year ago, I wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. You know what I find most impressive? Dr. Martinez asked. It's not just that you recovered, it's that you became an advocate for others. You took your experience and used it to help people in similar situations. That kind of post-traumatic growth is remarkable.
As spring semester continued, I began thinking seriously about my future career plans. The combination of my photography skills and my passion for mental health advocacy pointed towards several interesting possibilities. I was considering graduate programs in art therapy, exploring internships with mental health organizations, and even thinking about writing a book about family dynamics and mental health recovery. Whatever path I chose, I knew it would be informed by this journey. The girl who had once been told to snap out of it had learned to snap into action instead, advocating for herself, educating her family, and helping others navigate similar challenges. The transformation wasn't just mine, it was our entire family's. We'd learned that love sometimes means admitting you're wrong, that strength sometimes means asking for help, and that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. Most importantly, we'd learned that mental health is health, period. And just like any other health condition, it deserves understanding, support, and proper treatment. 2 years later, I stood in the gallery space of the Columbus Museum of Art, adjusting the lighting on my photography exhibition titled Invisible Battles: Mental Health Through the Lens. The opening reception was scheduled to begin in an hour, and I was putting the finishing touches on a display that had consumed the better part of my senior year. The exhibition featured 30 photographs, portraits of individuals from all walks of life who had shared their mental health journeys with me. There was Mrs. Patterson, a 70-year-old retired librarian who had lived with anxiety for decades before finally seeking treatment. James, a construction worker whose depression had nearly cost him his marriage until couples therapy helped him and his wife understand his condition. Dr. Chen, a successful pediatrician who managed bipolar disorder while saving children's lives. Each photograph was accompanied by a brief written narrative, but the real power was in the faces, the strength, the vulnerability, the hope captured in black and white. This wasn't the sanitized version of mental health recovery often portrayed in the media. These were real people with complex stories showing that mental health struggles don't discriminate based on age, profession, or background. "Tiffany, the catering staff wants to know where to set up the refreshment table," called my exhibition coordinator, snapping me out of my thoughts. As I directed the logistics, I marveled at how this moment had come to be. What started as a personal recovery story had evolved into my senior thesis project, which had been selected for this professional exhibition. The local media had picked up the story, and I'd been interviewed twice about the intersection of art and mental health advocacy. But the most meaningful part of this evening wouldn't be the critics or the potential buyers. It would be seeing my family walk through these gallery doors as my supporters rather than my skeptics. They arrived exactly on time. My father wearing the same tie he'd worn to my high school graduation, my mother in a new dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, and Jake sporting his Ohio University sweatshirt since he was home on spring break. Dr. Martinez had also come, bringing her husband and teenage daughter who were curious about her work. "Honey, this is incredible," my mother whispered as she took in the scope of the exhibition. She stopped in front of a portrait of a young mother whose postpartum depression had been misdiagnosed for months. These stories are so powerful. My father moved through the gallery more slowly, reading every narrative with the same careful attention he'd once applied to dismissing mental health concerns. When he reached the final photograph, a self-portrait I'd included, showing my own reflection in a therapy office window, he stood quietly for several minutes. "This one's different," he said when I joined him. "The others are all portraits of people, but this one shows the process," I finished. "The therapy office, the vulnerability of seeking help, the reflection representing self-awareness. It's about the journey rather than just the destination." He nodded thoughtfully. "It's the bravest one in the whole exhibition." The comment caught me off guard. 2 years earlier, this man had told me that seeking therapy was a sign of weakness. Now he was calling it brave. The transformation still amazed me. As the reception filled with visitors, I watched people move through the space with various reactions. Some viewers were clearly uncomfortable with the subject matter, hurrying past certain photographs with averted eyes. Others lingered, reading every word and studying each face with intense focus. A few approached me to share their own stories, describing family members or personal experiences with mental health challenges. One conversation particularly stood out. An elderly gentleman named Frank approached me near the end of the evening, holding a glass of wine and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "My grandson is about your age," he said without preamble. "He's been struggling with what his parents called depression, though I wasn't sure I believed in such things." He gestured toward the exhibition. "This has given me a lot to think about." "What aspects resonated with you?" I asked. "The diversity, I suppose. I expected to see young people, maybe some dramatic stories. But that businessman there," he pointed to a portrait of a financial advisor who described his panic attacks, "he reminds me of myself at that age. Successful on the outside, struggling on the inside." He paused, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "I think I owe my grandson an apology, and maybe I should educate myself instead of dismissing something I don't understand." These moments made every hour of work on the exhibition worthwhile. I was witnessing the same transformation in strangers that had occurred in my own family.
the shift from skepticism to understanding, from judgment to empathy. Near the end of the evening, Dr. Martinez found me standing in front of the timeline display I'd creating statistics about mental health treatment over the decades. "I'm incredibly proud of you," she said simply. "When you first came to my office, you were seeking validation that your pain was real. Now you're validating that experience for hundreds of other people." "I never could have imagined this outcome," I admitted. "When I made that first appointment, I just wanted to stop feeling so hopeless." "That's often how the most meaningful work begins," she replied, "with someone deciding to save themselves, then realizing they can help save others too." As the gallery began to empty, my family gathered around me for photos in front of the exhibition title wall. Jake had been documenting the entire evening with his phone, creating what he called behind-the-scenes content for my social media presence. "You know," he said as we posed for pictures, "I've been thinking about Mom's support group, Dad's reading, and your advocacy work, and my psychology studies. We've all become mental health advocates in our own ways." He was right. My mother now volunteered with the National Alliance on Mental Health organization, leading support groups for families navigating their loved ones' diagnoses. My father had started conversations about mental health resources at his workplace after a colleague's son died by suicide. Jake was planning to specialize in family therapy, specifically wanting to help families bridge the understanding gap we'd experienced. It's like that saying about planting trees. The best time to address mental health stigma was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. The following week brought news that would reshape my immediate future. The exhibition had caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who wanted to create a film about family dynamics and mental health recovery. She was offering me a position as both subject and co-producer, with the goal of creating educational content for families struggling with similar challenges. The opportunity felt like perfect symmetry. I'd started this journey as someone whose family didn't believe mental health conditions were real. Now I had the chance to help other families avoid that painful dynamic entirely.
But perhaps the most meaningful validation came in an unexpected form. 3 months after the exhibition closed, I received a letter forwarded through the museum from someone who had attended the opening reception. "Dear Miss Coleman," it began, "I attended your photography exhibition with considerable skepticism. I am a retired physician who spent 40 years dismissing what I considered emotional problems in favor of treating real medical conditions. Your exhibition, particularly the brain imaging information and the diversity of people you featured, has completely changed my perspective. I have reached out to my estranged daughter, who I now realize was struggling with depression when I told her to pull herself together 15 years ago. We're rebuilding our relationship with the help of family therapy. Thank you for opening my eyes to my own ignorance and giving me the chance to be a better father." Reading that letter, I thought about the ripple effects of advocacy work. This retired doctor would probably treat patients differently. His relationship with his daughter would heal. She might feel empowered to be more open about her mental health. Their family might become advocates for others, all because someone decided to share their story honestly, to challenge misconceptions with facts and personal experience. 6 months later, I graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography and a minor in psychology. At the graduation ceremony, when they called my name, my family's cheers were the loudest in the auditorium. Dr. Martinez was there too, having been invited as an honorary guest. In my graduation speech as class representative, I spoke about the power of changing narratives, both the stories we tell ourselves and the stories society tells about sensitive topics like mental health. 4 years ago, I arrived at this university carrying shame about seeking help for depression, I told my classmates and their families. I'm leaving with pride about that same journey, and with the knowledge that our most difficult experiences often become our greatest sources of strength and purpose. After the ceremony, as my family and I celebrated at dinner, my father raised his glass for a toast. "To Tiffany," he said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "for teaching us that courage sometimes looks like admitting you need help, that strength sometimes means being vulnerable, and that the best way to heal yourself is often to help heal others." As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. It had started with a desperate young woman making a phone call to a mental health clinic, hoping someone would believe her pain was real.
It was ending, or rather continuing, with a family transformed, a career dedicated to mental health advocacy, and the knowledge that every person who seeks help for their mental health makes it a little easier for the next person to do the same. The girl who had once been told to snap out of it had learned something far more valuable: how to speak up, stand up, and help others find their voices too. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful kind of recovery, the kind that reaches beyond yourself to touch other lives, creating ripples of understanding and hope that extend far beyond what you could ever imagine. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.